and what is the goal and the assets that CEMIC provides. What we would like to emphasize is on the future steps. We had two webinars end of October and the beginning of November about some of the core vocabularies. So the intention today is to discuss about the DCAT-AP. However, in late January, in the forthcoming year, we plan to discuss the rest of the issues that appear in the core vocabulary, such as a core person and a core business, and if needed, others that are raised from the rest of the vocabularies, as well as we are open to have a forthcoming meeting on DCAT-AP next year, if needed, to discuss remaining topics that cannot be discussed due to time limitations in the next year after the webinar of core works. So I pass the floor to Max to continue and sketch a bit the objectives of the DCAT-AP.
Okay, thank you, Pavlina, for your opening, and welcome everybody to the meeting today. I am Max Dekkers. I am a member of the DCAT-AP team, and I'll be your moderator today. And most of the talking is going to be done by Bert van Nuffelen, who is the editor of the specification. But I guess most of the people on the call will know Bert and myself. So I just want to stress that please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand on the button that is on the bottom of the screen, but you'll know that. So let's move on. Just for people to remind ourselves what DCAT is about. So we'll support the discovery of and access to mostly open data in cross-border and cross-domain environments from distributed portals around Europe. It is an application profile of the base standard of W3C DCAT, and what we do in DCAT-AP, we express constraints and usage notes on the use of the elements of DCAT. And in some cases, we have added properties and usage note for the and usage of controlled vocabularies where that makes sense. And we try to do it in a way that these implementations of DCAT-AP are harmonized across Europe and then are able to feed the European data portal, what is nowadays called data.europa.eu. And also was one of the slide with the specifications that we have. We also have specifications that extend DCAT-AP for base registries, for geospatial information and for statistical data. And as well, of course, there are many initiatives around the member states to extend DCAT-AP with national requirements. Next slide, please. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the new release of DCAT-AP that we're working on. There's a couple of things that are part of the new release. There are bug fixes, and those we're not going to discuss on the webinar. Those are on GitHub, and you will see that, and you're able to comment on them. And I think already people have been doing that. Most of the first part of the webinar, as Pavlina said, is to address some open issues that we think need a little bit of discussion. Some of them might need a little bit more discussion, and some things are more announcements. There is also on GitHub a link to the new HTML representation, and we're not going to look at that during the webinar, but it's open, of course, also for your comments on GitHub. And the last part of the meeting is to look at what the new DCAT 3.0 that is close to endorsement or agreement, what effects there are on the specification of DCAT-AP. And there's also the opportunity there to discuss that. The final thing that I want to say here is on the next slide, is that we're also looking at ADMS. And many of you might know that ADMS was defined by the CEMIC activity 10 years ago, just before we went into DCAT-AP. But there are some points there. We have done that. We did that 10 years ago in the namespace MW3C, and we had some controlled vocabularies that were pushed into Perl.org, and we're currently looking at how to harmonize that, how to make sure that we actually can maintain ADMS. And we're also looking at the refreshment of ADMS, because of course in the last 10 years things have happened, also things have happened with DCAT-AP that might have an influence on ADMS. And there is a link there to GitHub where you can see, you will be seeing the changes that are being proposed and discussions that are necessary to make that new release of ADMS. That's so as far as I wanted to go for the context of what we're doing today, and I would be happy to hand over to Bert to go into DCAT issues, and I will keep an eye on the chat and on your hands so that we can see at what point we can have some discussions and take into account your comments. Bert?
Okay, then you hear me? And
yes.
Okay, good. Then let's start on it. So our agenda for the first part is on a few topics which we would organize then according to feedback that we expect from you as a community, and to know where to go and to create a good new proposals for that. So on the first topic is about formatting. There are a few references to it, and this one I will explain a bit what are the possible use cases, and I would like to discover with you on those use cases which direction we want to go. There are some issues on spatial aspects, on shackle. There's an issue regarding legal information, and then if time permits, Max will keep an eye on it. We will discuss a few short issues so that we can have feedback immediately from you. Otherwise, they will be going to GitHub. And we will have a short set of reminders as well of GitHub issues where we think keep an eye on it, give feedback if you can. Otherwise, we cannot progress on that. So first starting with formatting, if we look to this issue, it has been mentioned in several places. It has been hanging a bit along. And when looking to that, there is several use cases actually mentioned. And I numbered them here 1, 2, 3. And I would like to explore with you first what are these different use cases, and then to see and go in discussion with you if any of these use cases are needed a resolvement in the decision in our specification, or some tackling in another way or another way around. So the first use case is the simple case where you want to search and filter on your catalog for a set of data and data sets in a desired representation. Then formatting comes into the game. A second case is that you want to search or filter for data services that provide a data set in a desired representation. So we already are focusing then from the perspective of the data services, not anymore like in use case 1 on data sets. And the last one is that typically in data services, there is a capability of that data service and detailed representation of what it can do in technical ways expressed, and how we can lift that automatically in the metadata. There are the 3 use cases. And if we look to the use cases, then each by one. So what happens if you are looking for the data in a particular representation from the perspective of the data sets, and you start searching in your catalog into it, then if there's a distribution with a desired format, you're happy, you have found it, you can continue with the work that you want to do with the data. But if there's no such distribution, then you have to look to the associated data services, and at the level of the data services, there's no format being defined. So it's a bit of unknown. You don't know in which format actually the data is being available. You have to explore the metadata of that data service or the data service itself to find the data. If you take then the perspective of your catalog and then somebody starts to explore from the perspective of the services, and I want to find only the services that are providing it according to XML representation, that's the output I want to work with. Today it's impossible. So you cannot filter your catalog on find me all the data services that only provide XML. However, there is a possibility that you could query for, if filled in of course, that instead of searching for a particular format, you actually search for the protocols, the style, how this service is working with that. And here's a classical example. Instead of searching for RDF as a representation, the data represented, you search for SPARQL endpoints. And you know, because of that, if you have a set of SPARQL endpoints, you can query it and you have it in the RDF syntax that you want. So, but that shift of querying to get the desired representation that you have in, and you have to know for your community what are the protocols that you want to query for. The last use case is that we have to realize that data services, and when they are described, that there is a data endpoint description, and this is typically a very detailed description, and there can be statically open API or API documentation, or it can refer to something more dynamic, where you have a query to a capability service or so, where you can explore what this endpoint can do. But there's no way that we at this moment impose any requirements or connections between these two worlds. So that means that they can be get out of sync, that you can specify in the metadata, for instance, I adhere to be a SPARQL endpoint, while actually it is not anymore a SPARQL endpoint. And that's fine. Kind of things happen or can happen, of course. So this is the challenge at use case 3. To give, and maybe if this might be helpful, this is just an idea of an illustration of an example of a data set. So you have a point of interest data set, and you could imagine that this is being distributed as a particular file, as a shapefile, for instance. It's a single snapshot at one particular time in a well-defined shape schema with the column names are well fixed. So it's a file that you can download and can work and reuse. On the other hand, there is this Geo API, which is kind of a Swiss knife, which can actually provide you the same data in all formats as well in the one that is being expressed as this distribution. And so how we deal with that and how we make the relationship between that, and is that needed? So it's just as an illustration maybe for the discussion. So my question to you, for those 3 use cases being described, are that the real use case patterns that reside behind the question to add format information or representation information to a data service? So that is the first question, and if so, that for you as user, which of the use cases is then the most critical one, or is there an alternative or new use cases that I have not been listing that would support the need for format information associated with the data service? So I would like to open the floor.
As you said, Bert, there are 3 use cases. One is for searching for data, one is for searching for services and the format of services. So the first is the format of data, the second one is the format of services, and the third is for capabilities of a data service.
Yeah, and so that's
all 3 of them.
That are the 3 use cases where formatting or representation information towards a service appears and this need appears and so on.
Okay, so I got two messages here, one from Kees Troutwijn, that he struggles to represent linked data endpoints because of the formats needed to be included. And Matthias says that he wants case 1 and potentially case 2. And Bart says useful for searching on portals, but I'm not quite sure which use case Bart is referring to.
I see a hand raised.
Do you see a hand raised? Oh, I didn't see that. So good. Yeah. Who is the hand raised?
Peter Ludwig.
Hi, it's Peter from Germany. Yeah, we are from the transportation community, and we have those 3 use cases very highly represented. So we have now the situation that we built an own extension to DCAT-AP, which you might be aware of, and we propose some new properties covering those things, like describing a data service and describing the API structures. And there will be some proposals early next year how to do it in our own extension, because we haven't found anything suitable in the RDF world. So describing data services and how to separate or how to distinguish a data set from a service. So there's a flag we propose to do something like, this is the data service, this is the data set, which Max has shown on the slide. So we have different things in the pipeline which will cover those discussions. So let's see if we can, close the bridge or get together here in the discussion. Yeah?
Peter, is it possible to share an early version of your ideas?
Yes. Yes, I will do so. This early version is a conceptual model, which is more or less a table and a UML diagram, which shows you the new properties which we will propose and as new additions to DCAT-AP, and you're happy to review it.
Okay.
So
I think that would be useful. I think I see other comments here in the chat also where Geraldine says that in Flanders they only describe formats and datasets and leave the how service deliver in the capabilities of the service itself. So they take sort of a less detailed approach. But I think it would be good to see the approach that Peter is referring to, so that we can see how those can meet the possibilities of the 3 use cases. I see for the time being only people saying use case number 1 certainly, use case number 2 potentially, and what Peter said in his work, the transport case, they need all 3 of them. So this is something that we need to take into account.
Okay.
He says that for the formats, they use the formats, the file types, I guess, of the publications office of the EU vocabularies. I think that is also a sensible way to do things.
Okay, that's good to steer up the discussion a bit, and we have prepared that the case of format and representation for a data service might be added as a property, and I'll click. And so I would like then to ask this question and to see how we can evolve or to feel the water and the motivation on your side. What is happening if we add a property format at the level of a data service? What is the intention you expect that this thing should return and that users of the catalog should understand? So either case 1, a format would, for a data service, would indicate the structure that is returned by querying to a request to the endpoint URL. So is returned, so it applies 1 value and no other possibilities in this kind of definition. In the second option, is that the structure, it's the format that is indicated is a structure that can be returned. So it's one of the many possibilities. So that implies multiple values. And the third option is that this is the structure that is by default is being returned. It expresses that there's one value only in this format to be expected, so the default value, but that there are possibly other values which are not listed, and which you have to discover by reading into the endpoint description. So I would like to see if we go forward on adding formats as a property. Then what of the options are more favored?
In Norway, Oystein says that they have added the repeatable field. So I guess that would cover option 2 here, the formats that can be returned.
Yeah.
Well, Christian agrees with the multiple formats. Jakob says, can we adopt all 3 options? They all make sense, but I think they're mutually exclusive, aren't they?
Yeah, they are to a large extent. I try to make a precise definition so that the expectation of what the end user can expect from it is as clear as possible, of course. And that's
well, but there is a little bit of overlap. For example, if in option 2 you can have multiple values, but if you only have one, then in fact you're going back to option 1. So in fact, EU 2 allows you to put multiple values there if there are multiple formats. But if there's only one format, you just give one. So that is then the one that is returned. So Matthias says that option 2 makes sense when considering WMS services. So I would think that maybe option 2 is the most general, Brett?
That's the most general, that's the least restrictive, of course. And I see Matthias, I think you have a hand raised.
Yeah, so maybe just a comment on what we have seen as different kind of data services in the wild. I mean, for sure, VMS services are typically available in multiple formats. When you make a request, you can get in PNG or JPEG or something, and when you do the get capabilities request, you get multiple options in the metadata in the description set, which also highlights another case, which is that there are situations when you access the endpoint URL, you get some metadata, or you get a navigational structure. This is often the case for statistical data APIs as well, where you navigate your way all the way down to a specific data set or a statistical table, and then you make the request, and then you get the actual data. So there are basically 2 ways of accessing the API. First, to navigate in the API, and then you get the actual data. And I think that when we describe the format, we should try to not indicate the structure format or the metadata format. Like for VMS, it would be XML in most cases, and I don't think that is relevant. I think it's more relevant to say that the format of a VMS service is a JPEG, PNG, TIFF, etc. Alternatively, to separate the 2. That's my perspective.
There's a point from Jakob saying he was thinking of, I think, sub-properties of format that actually says exactly what it is. So whether something is a default format or whether it is available formats. But the other thing is, I think Geraldine makes a point here that she says they're afraid of actually duplicating information from the service into the metadata of the service, because in that case, you need to be able to keep those 2 in sync. So that is a maintenance issue that you might want to avoid. So that's the one point that would actually say, well, let's not do that, and let's just give the opportunity to look inside the description of the service to see what formats it gives.
She has as well raised her hand, I think, Max.
I don't see the hand raising, but.
Okay, maybe I can elaborate on that. In the ISO world, it's very easy to make the services fill in the metadata. And so there we can read them out, but also over there, we only use the default XML description and make the users get into the get capabilities to check out all the formats that the service is delivering. Because we saw service providers or creators, or mostly not the people who fill in the metadata, and then otherwise it is not happening that they fill in correctly. Otherwise it gets out of sync because they make new versions and they forget about the metadata. And so therefore we took that decision, but it's just for information reasons.
Okay. And Case made a comment here that the default format may not be always the same for all users. So it depends on how you get to the service, what default you're getting.
Indeed, that is typically with services and so on. One thing I think never in my proposal or my idea was to make it mandatory. Yeah, so this will be always an optional field, in my opinion. But I wanted to raise a discussion on the right semantics, so the semantics that is mostly shared and needed by the community. That's.
But I feel that there are some comments about why we would need option 3 by default, if that is really necessary, and it doesn't always work. If you have content negotiation, you might not be able to do that. But that's a comment I think we need to take into account.
Yeah, that's good.
Geraldine, you still have your hand up? Or Geraldine? Oh no. Okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Okay, Kees, do you want to? I think see raising.
Yeah, I did raise it, and yeah, because I agree completely with what Max said. I think default. I don't know if default is very valuable, especially when there can be more than one default. So how do you do that? And I would say the most important thing is telling users what kind of formats are available, and then let them figure out how to get the formats. If you look at automatic processes, that's what you're really interested in. And the default is like a nice gesture of the service itself, but maybe it's not really important to know the defaults. But that could be my view, of course.
Okay, but that's good. That's a thing that we were listening for this feedback, and so there's a reason why I put them up. So no, we should not think in that way. Good comments.
But I think that I feel that there's a couple of comments in favor of option number 2.
Okay.
Provide information and metadata, although with this proviso that Geraldine gave, that there is a risk of mismatching or out of sync between what the service can provide and what the metadata says that the service can provide. But that is something that that could be then is that more of a quality issue. And as you said, Bert, the field, the property would be optional, so that if you cannot maintain metadata, you might not be willing to provide that information in metadata. And look, that's right. It's always being out of sync is always a risk for the metadata. But in this case, we can identify what the risk is, the actual risk is.
Yeah, and then a bit of connecting to this, opening up back to use case 3. Is there any other information that you expect to be pulled from the endpoint URL description beyond formatting? I would like to open now this discussion on that, just since we are in this mindset of formatting and so on. If there's in the community beyond this something that we have to go further on that, or we stick to only this property and that's it.
Are there any use cases that you know of, Bert, where more properties might be necessary? I see case.
Yeah, we encountered a point where we want to describe compressed formats, and in the current AP profile, you can only have one, but that's not. Maybe it's beside the point because it's not data services, it's distributions. But you can only say you can only give up one format. But in a compressed format, it can be different file formats, which is useful information for somebody waiting to consume this set, this data set or distribution or whatever. But it's limited. So we decided to drop compressed formats because it's the same. All you can say is it's a zip or it's a tar or it's something like that. But you can't describe if it's CSV as well as XML as well as JPEG or whatever, which are normal use cases for us. So that's something I would like to be able to get back from an endpoint, be it a distribution or a web service, like all the formats that are offered there, because that's something I would like to know if I am to consume the data. I would like to know beforehand what's in the zip or in the compressed format or whatever. Because then if there's a format that I can't consume, I can decide not to investigate that endpoint. And now it's just one format. Well, maybe you have only one format in your compressed thing, and then it would be a use case, but we decided in the Netherlands, we decided to drop it from the profile because of that reason.
Okay. So you're not proposing anything new, you're just saying that in your case, you decided to drop this particular property.
Yeah, because you're only allowed to describe one format in the AP profile and not several, because that would, for me, it would be a normal use case. If the file format is compressed, because there's of course an attribute for that you would be able to list all the formats inside the compressed file or the package file. But maybe that's not on the table right now. But
that's not directly, but maybe one comment that might be useful is that very typically when you have packaged using a zip or compressed format, the collection has a name like a shape format. In geospatial, this is the case. So it's a shape format and actually contains of many files. It's actually a zip of many things. And I think the Publications Office has added new file types and to identify this is a shape file, so that you actually indicate this is the shape file, and that makes, of course, the single value still bearable for many more cases. So it might be useful as a feedback here that if you encounter those compressed collective file formats where you want to identify them in a new name or they have a particular name in your case, to reach out to the Publications Office on the file type and to see if that can be added. And then it might work for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there is a point here, an authentication method was something that JRC proposes that could be part of the metadata for the service. And one more from Thomas Turcic, the property to flag that we handle only a copy of metadata. I'm not quite sure that I understand what you mean there. Thomas?
Geraldine mentioned that the ISO metadata was updated and the metadata portal get out of sync. So if I flag the metadata portal has only a copy of the original information. So a bot or some robot can update the metadata in the metadata portal more often. So is the time running out of sync is not so big.
Okay, so you're actually referring to that you want to point to the source of the metadata, because
Yes.
well, I think most of the harvesting creates copies of metadata in any case. So the question is, in which case you want people to go to the original source of the metadata to harvest the initial metadata. But be aware that the metadata in the portal might be updated, that might have added some stuff to it in terms of enrichments, for example. And it might be quite complicated to identify what needs to be done with that metadata. So. And Kuldar said, let's keep the format information simple, so that we shouldn't make it too complicated and have too many use cases for that. And in Czechia, Jakub says it's packaging multiple final formats and schema formats in one package is an anti-pattern, because then it gets really complicated to provide a sensible way of processing that, unless it's well-known package and a shapefile, as Bert said.
I think in that case, it's good to reach out to the publications office.
Yeah. Okay. Bert, does it finalize what you wanted to discuss here? Because
yeah, I think is a good feedback, a number of feedback, so we can go further on this, and to have. I feel that there is a need for this optional property to be added, and we'll try to organize it and to structure it around option 2, what's here on the screen, and then
okay, so
propose it.
Okay, so move on.
Okay, so then we have a few geospatial issues to be discussed. One of them is actually a reopening of an issue that has been closed in the past, because actually in DCAT-2 and DCAT-AP 2, this was aligned with each other. It was a remark that log-n geometry actually has as range log-n geometry as class. It's a class as range. However, in DCAT-2 it was RDFS literal, and now in DCAT-3, in alignment, if we look to it, we see that this actually has been corrected. So this is a backwards incompatible change with regards to DCAT-2. So it's kind of reopening. I want to point it out that this is upcoming, and if we want to align in the next release with DCAT-3, this will be a backwards incompatible change that we have to adopt.
I saw that there were already comments on GitHub on this issue. I
see the Lutger, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think technically it's backward incompatible, but from the semantics, the location ontology always used, it's not a different use.
No, it's a harmonization. It's a correct harmonization of the basics and so on. It's actually a mistake that is being corrected. But yeah, the impact compared, if we look from our specification to one to the other, yeah, we have to.
Yeah, I think it's not breaking backward compatibility, because the location ontology still accepts a literal as the location geometry class. It's not, in terms of RDFS or RDF, it's not correct, but they still accept it. They even give it as an example to use a literal as this class, because it's only as a concept a location or a geometry. Yeah. So all the literals, DKT literals we had earlier, who were correctly typed, are still also in version 3 correct as a location geometry.
Okay.
We should just don't do the mistake and say in the shackle shapes that that the range of location geometry should be a location geometry class, because then we will always make our models incorrect.
Okay, yeah, but that's so anyhow always separate. We have separated that thing out of the core shape, so that because we know that if you share and harvest the metadata, not always the range classification belongs. It is a concept or something like that. Is a part of it. So that will be anyhow in the separate part of it. But I want to I already mentioned this. This is a topic that is will be reopened, and this is part of the alignment.
Okay.
A more, let's say, discussable on saying what is the options, the possible options. Oh, Andrea, you have so you now.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bert. No, just to clarify a bit the point. So what has been said is completely correct. So this location geometry class was defined in the location vocabulary as a kind of an abstract class that was kind of placeholder for any kind of possible geometry representations, including literals or classes, for instance, from GeoSparkle, the geometry classes in GeoSparkle, or relevant subclasses. What has been done, basically DCAT-3 is just to align with that, because in DCAT-2 the decision was to use a literal because basically the implementations that were out there about the use of location geometry for specifying the spatial coverage of a data set were just using literals. So then there was a decision based on comments that has been received that this is incorrect, should be aligned with the location vocabulary. This is done. But again, if you have a look also at the usage note of the location geometry class in DCAT-3, it says explicitly that the value can be either a literal or a class as GeoSparkle geometry. So just to cut it short, keeping in DCAT-AP the range of location geometry as RDFS literal is conceptually not in conflict with the current version of DCAT, because the location geometry class is something that, yeah, RDF-wise is not correct, but is included conceptually also literal. So it's a kind of a class that can be either a data type or, you know, a normal class. So
Okay.
if there are any troubles, for instance, for the shackle point of view, keeping RDF literal as a range for location geometry is not in conflict with the DCAT-3 specification, because again, the location geometry class includes literals as possible representations.
Okay,
So
so
it's really up to the community to decide whether to stick to the, you know, formally to the definition that we have in the location vocabulary, or just restrict and say, okay, we just use a subset of the possibilities provided by the location vocabulary.
okay, yeah, thanks for the clarification, Andrea. Okay, let's take that up, and then maybe we have to see how we formulate it. But anyhow, it should be named location geometry. That's minimally we should include that into the application profile of DCAT-AP. But then we should look what is then the recommendation of the usage note, what's maybe to be used best to highlight that. That could be a discussion that we can have. Okay, then I would like to go to the next geospatial topic, and that is on issues 175, where that it was mentioned that a data set has the possibility to have multiple geographical coverages, and that each of them can be represented in different ways. And we have included in DCAT-AP that is by preference by using a bounding box or centroid, and alternatively being represented as a range and a kind of however geometrical description, and it is look and geometry where that comes out of this. we have added a constraint, a cardinality constraint on these spatial representations with the intent that there's only one representation for each geographical coverage. So this is the current specification. So the current specification says you can only have one bounding box at most, one centroid at most for a geographical coverage that you associate with your data sets. And then the remark was made that actually the bounding box itself can be represented in many different ways. So although you have only one, and you want to say there's only one, there's actually for the same bounding box, you can represent it in different serializations. So WKT, GML, even in that parallel, you have possibilities with changing coordinate reference systems. So it comes like multi-language text. It's a similar thing. It's in multi-language, which representation we are going to use to indicate this is a bounding box, and is this one max cardinality reflecting that there should be only one textual string value over there, or should it indicate at most one value in a serialization and what this serialization might be. So this is the issue, and I would like to see what is the possible options with you. What we can do is that option A, proposal A, is that we explain this and we add a usage note that we, in DCAT bounding box and DCAT centroid and so on, say, okay, these are the different serializations of the same polygon. So the polygon is not changed. You cannot make a different bounding box into it, but you can represent it in different ways. WGK, GML, they are equivalent, and they should represent exactly the same bounding box. And then I added as well something that should be coordinate reference system aware, so that you know how to resolve it, so that you can geometrically calculate that this is exactly the same thing. And by this, we can, in proposal A, lift the cardinality from max 1 to max n as case. So we indicate to the usage node this limited use, like we do for multilingual. That means that, this is a simple change and we can do that. I will go on the impact on for the rest on all of the proposals. We can do the other way, and proposal B is more invasive, and it says instead of lifting the cardinality to n, we're going to stick to 1. But we are going to impose more restrictions on, I'm going to say it will be a single representation, and it will be looking like this. It will be WTK, it will be, the CRS will be WG84, and that's it. Now, that is the proposal B. So very strict, so that we know exactly what is the value that is being in the bounding box representation. And proposal C is a slight variant of proposal B, where we say, okay, instead of a single case, we actually define a few well-defined serializations, and we say the publishers to choose any one of these at most, but at most one. So it can pick, one publisher can pick the GML representation, the other one can pick because it likes WTK, and it uses that, and that's fine. But we limit it to a few, and so that there's at most one, and that they are considered as interchangeable and convertible. What is the impact analysis? Is that in proposal A, all the, let's say, representation, if you want to make a nice automatic bounding box representation, you have to handle all possible cases of geometrical representations, WTK, GML, whatever. It's on the catalog portal maintainer to handle all those cases. In proposal B, we restrict and impact a lot of all the publishers, because today there are no rules on it. There's not a strict rule on it, so all publishers will probably have to reconsider and to force into this single case. But it will be, of course, for portal owners, catalog owners, much easier to create a nice bounding box and so on. And proposal C is somehow a variant of the middle impact of the two. In order to do and to realize B or C, we have to do extra work. So this is as well impacting us. B and C, it means that we have to define much clearer which are the allowed serializations that we want to bring forward and to harmonize and standardize upon. Which is
already a comment. Was already a comment before you got into this slide from the data.europa.eu from Ludger, saying that it would be so nice if there was one, so that your portal could actually create nice visualizations. But I think that proposal C, as you said, Bert, with sort of the middle ground, where it is a limited set of options, which then could also help the portal owner to be able to handle that small set of serialization. Ludger, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I have not a very strong argument for either variance. It would. It's something we would have to talk through with our data providers. Ideally, we would know what we should provide, but not be limited in case of something else is delivered. So this is in your proposals, probably C.
I guess that. Yeah. Okay. So that's from your point of view, C would be a useful addition, to have only a small set of serializations that you can handle. And Bart also says option C is a good option.
Yes, and yeah, we are not strongly against increasing the cardinality, even though we have not thought about the consequences in detail. So yeah.
Okay, and I have Matthias also saying option B or C. And Matthias also suggests to look at the statistics on the data portal, which are the most used serializations that we could then use to define which ones are allowed. And GRC says that C is the better option for GRC. So maybe we should initially go for further develop proposal C with information about the statistics of currently used serializations.
That we can do. I would already ask on proposal C, one element into the discussion is the, you see CRS, the coordinate reference system. I think that is something that is particular into, if you do geospatial data sets, every member state has their own precise coordinate reference system into it. And if the metadata is using that as the bounding box reference, that means that the portal owner, DCAT-AP should know all coordinate reference systems. And the question is, and it's an open question, if our users of the portal, of the catalog, of the metadata need that precision, or if we can live with something, let's say, more web-friendly, the WSG84, if that is sufficient. This is not as precise, but that is just sufficiently, I think, in my opinion, for finding out data sets that are in your interests.
Okay. And Matthias says we don't need that precision, but maybe Bert, this is an issue that we can move to GitHub and discuss further and see what the possibilities are for options for proposal
But I
C.
would want to pitch it because this is one big element in, let's say, in possibly in the changes to. I think probably that's the most impacting change for the metadata.
I suggest we move that to GitHub because we're running
okay,
really
good.
late. Yep.
Okay, but at least thank you for giving that we should work towards C, so we'll come back to you on that. Okay.
Okay. We could actually do the little break now, and then you go further with the shackle stuff after the 5-minute break, so people can stretch their legs. And,
I see that Matthias is short.
Yeah, could I just, well, the current implementation, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there is a DCT spatial pointing to a blank node typed as, is it geometry? And then you have the, well, the centroid or the bounding box. Yes, so the spatial then should be of right now, I think it's higher. You are allowed to have multiple references to multiple blank nodes.
Yes, you can express that this data set is of spatial coverage Paris and Amsterdam. You can express that.
Oh, it's on that level. Okay, I get it now.
But then it's Amsterdam that you have a bounding box and that you want to, and it's about the bounding box representation that we were discussing.
Yeah, but do we really need to point out 2 different bounding boxes, one for Amsterdam, one for Paris? Wouldn't that just be one big bounding box instead of covering both? I'm just thinking whether we really need to have that.
That's another discussion in the sense that that was not in the request to make that one or to limit that to merge that. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, it's another discussion, but from my point of view, I think it's unnecessary. We should just have one pointer.
Okay.
One blank node.
We'll have the 5-minute break now, and then we reconvene at 10 past 3. Yeah, and then we'll continue with the shackle. So.
Okay, thank you.
10 past 3, we'll reconvene.
Okay.
Okay, it's 3:10. Shall we move on?
Okay, good. Then this is about a few topics, and there are a new set as well, two new ways in GitHub, but those are not in the slides here. There's one request that has been made to reformulate the shackle representation as it is today. It's in the issue and in the pull request. And actually what is the concern is that today the shackle shapes combine multiple constraints into one expression. So you cannot refer to an individual constraint. So you cannot refer to the max cardinality constraint of a particular property. It's about all the constraints on that property that you have. And that might impact and then the reuse, and if you want to cherry pick some of these rules, it's not that easy, or make some translations about the message that you want to add to it. It's not that easy. So you need essentially for that a more expanded and more split up version of the shackle shapes. So instead of just accepting the pull request, I would like to propose first the approach and then see how we can realize this. So the current proposal is on the left-hand side, the current situation on the left-hand side for one example, and on the right-hand side you see the proposal. What is happening is that for each property block there will be a node shape block. It will be a list, so a node shape becomes a list of references to individual named constraints. That's the first. Therefore, we have every named constraint to give and to expand into it, and then you will see that it will be splitting out. And so in this way, we get every unique constraint a unique identifier, and this can be then lead to reuse or more facilitating reuse by the local or the national data portals. There's an open question, and it will be at least not for this next release, but it has to do with the name convention of the URIs that's actually over there. We have to give them a name. We can find us here. This was the suggestion that was made, and then I roughly followed, except that I added node count and min count onto it to the property name, is to make them dereferenceable. So my short question is, well, the yellow and the orange is realizable and we can do it. I think there's a good proposal. I would like as well to hear from the community, is there need for dereferenceable constraints up now, and are you relying and want to rely upon for that in your services?
In fact, to have them persistent.
Yeah, to have them persistent and dereferenceable. Yeah. Because then we have to make them scoped to the version as well, etc. So it's the name giving of those URIs that we have to make careful.
People put in the chat if they agree with that or don't agree with it.
Do you need it? That's maybe the question. Do you want to rely on it as in the short term? It can be in the long term, but
Ludwig said they have to be dereferenceable. Matthias questions whether it's correct. But I don't understand what you say, should they not be collected into via AND?
So what I mean is that there is a mechanism in Shackle to combine multiple, I think, both property shapes and node shapes into a bigger shape via an AND construct or an OR construct. And from my perspective, what you are saying is that there need to be two properties title with this construct. But I'm not an expert in Shackle. I'm just wondering whether not this construction that is available in Shackle should be used. That is having one sh colon property pointing to another property constraint or property shape, which then just points to all of the other via an AND construct.
So they need to look at that, Bert.
Yeah, they have maybe to see, but normally this should be workable this way, at least. But okay.
Just check it, but I have only Luther saying that yes, they'd like them to be referenceable so that you can add translations or deactivate them. Okay, so that's.
Can you Lucia, can you explain how you see that? Just that's good for, I think, for everybody else as well to understand a bit how you intend to use it.
Of course. Well, yeah, the proposal is from us from DCAT-AP. We are reusing the shackle shapes you provided for our own validator, and we add our own additional rules. Yeah, we add them. And in addition, we add a translation. And currently, we would have to fork your rules and add the translations within the shapes, as you can see on the left side. And in the long term, it would be nice if we could just import your shapes from GitHub and use them directly and still add translations and deactivate shapes that we don't need. And to be able to do this, we have to be able to say the shape data service property DCT title node kind gets the shackle message. Jeder Titel muss ein literal sein. So we can add a translation and maybe a link to the convention we are adding at this point in DCAT-AP. Yeah. In the short term, we don't need this change to happen, I would say, for the current version, because we made the proposal and have a local fork of the shapes and added the names there, and there would be no use for us if you do it for the version 2.1 or 1.1, especially if the names change. So this would just make additional work for us because we would have to align the naming. But for the next version, 3.0 or whatever, would be nice if we could use the official shapes with the official IRIs, URIs to add our translations. And
okay, but it's good. But that's then we know. Do you understand the requirements and the need for persistency? And then yeah, we have to look into it, how it goes from one version to the other version, because that's the tricky thing that we have to then to consider.
Okay. So if you want to move on, Bert.
Yeah. So unless nobody is, this is, let's say, a restructuring and a more accessibility of it.
And more discussion will take place on GitHub on this for the next version.
Yeah, this one is a slight reformulation of a challenge which we have with code lists, with controlled vocabularies, is that the shackle shape currently for some of the code lists cannot rely on an existing collection, in the sense that we cannot just query and know that this is based on some structural information, meta information of the concept, whether or not it is a concept in the right concept scheme. So for the publications office, this is easy. For all those, we just can get a list and we include it and you get validated. But it's not the case for a few of them, and in particular geonames and IANA media types, that doesn't happen for that. So there's difficulties on how to handle and so on. Preferably, I would like to base it on structural metadata to know that it's really into the list. That's not available. So the alternative is to do a textual validation to look to the prefix of the URI that is being shared. So this is relying on the prefix. This is a little bit more vulnerable on that. So that would be the change for these few that cannot be relied on that. So and there's another pattern, Lutje, that you want to share. But I see support for this change as well. Yeah. So okay. Then we'll execute and make this proposal as well.
Okay.
There are a few shackle issues. Have a look to them and try to give feedback to that. There's an issue filed on legal information on the use of a controlled vocabulary on license from the Publications Office. As such, this list is valuable and useful, but it is not always applicable or useful by the member states because they typically have their specific legislation and they might impose, because of this is a legislation expression of legal expressions, and appointed that you should use your member state specific way of working. So it is not possible to just impose this code list as this controlled vocabulary as the only one to be used, but we can recommend to use them if your member state of your portal does not have an alternative. Please use this one as a first resource so that we have better harmonization.
So there is already discussion on GitHub, I understand, and I have Matthias with his hand raised. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, there was an old hand raise.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we continue that discussion on GitHub?
Yeah, so this is just to say that the proposal is to make an update and a stronger statement in the usage of it. So there's a section 5.4 that we will reformulate and to make it stronger. And yeah, if you have any comments or find that this should be elaborated further on in a particular direction, yeah, add it to the GitHub. This one is a simple, this is a change, and you see here this coming back to the refreshment of ADMS and the controlled vocabularies that Max mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, is that ADMS status vocabulary has been proposed for distribution, a new null, a new controlled vocabulary by Publications Office, and the proposal is to replace the recommendation from ADMS controlled vocabulary to the Publications Office controlled vocabulary. It's in line with everything else. It has the same statuses in local names, but it will be then changing the URI in the namespace. So this is a proposal. If you find this problematic, reply in the issue. I think this is clear what the proposal is. I just want to highlight on this.
I got 2+1s already. Okay, go ahead.
So, and then this is a bit of a similar. This is a point of let's say a bit of cleanup. The DCAT team taxonomy. If we look into our current specification and we look into the section 5.2 where the list of a table of mandatory code list is named, then there's a reference into that one. You should use a specific value from, you should use a specific value for a DCAT team at least. And actually that is not a code list constraint, but a value constraint. So we don't think it's best placed at that place. So the proposal is to remove this value constraints from section 5.2 and but add a new usage node at the level of the DCAT theme taxonomy that it must have at least the null theme as since this is a mandatory controlled vocabulary.
Okay, you have a comment there?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree to the proposal. At this point, I would like to ask how we handle the mandatory code lists overall, because I think I made a ticket for this a while ago. Sometimes a mandatory code list seems to mean that all values that are used with this property have to come from this list, and sometimes it means at least once it should be from this list. And I think we need to be more specific what we want. In this example, or in the example of DCAT theme, I think it makes sense to say there should be at least one use of DCAT theme with the official list, but it's not illegal or wrong to use in addition other values for a local theme. I'm pretty sure some local application profiles already do this, but we are not always clear what we mean with a mandatory list, and I think this should be explicit.
So I guess what you're suggesting is that we look for all the properties where we say that a particular code list has to be used to see if that's the only one that can be used or that it's one of the code lists that can be used. And in case, for example, a theme, we already say that at least the ones from the dataset theme needs to be used, but we need to be more explicit in all cases where we recommend or make mandatory the use of a code list. I think that was a good point. And you have already said you have a issue on that in GitHub, so we'll take it from there. Okay, Bert, is it okay?
That's okay. Yes, I think so. This is a good point, and we have we'll try to make it clear as well.
Okay, good.
Okay, so this is we're coming to a smaller issue. So this is an issue that appeared as well when I was looking into DCAT-3, that there's a change in DCAT-3 from for byte size. This is the change, and I propose to align with it. So the ticket is as well on GitHub, so you can give comments to it, but it's probably not intrusive one.
Okay.
Then I have a few reminders. Just quick to give you a reminder, there is an issue on 223 on identifiers guideline. This is referring to our work in this webinars that we did in the beginning of the year. Please have a look to them. Give maybe some comments if you endorse it or where it can be improved, so that we can create or see if we can include it as well as a guideline into the new release. So that would address as well a few other tickets to it. On another one is that there's an issue 116 that has been refiled in W3C DCAT. It has been closed. I propose to close it as well, just to highlight. If you want to deal with this one, then otherwise we will close it because it has been addressed at W3C. And this is a reminder to discuss, and it will probably come back a bit in our alignment with DCAT-3, and in short, that is how to deal with profiling and how we make that better and fit in DCAT. So there's a ticket that started the discussion here, and then we have posted a question in W3C, but it's not yet resolved. But just pointing an attention, this is maybe good to have a read into it and to think over it.
Any of those kinks, I think we would suggest people to comment on GitHub if there is any comments on those issues. And also, we always say people are also encouraged to contribute to the issues at W3C if you have your opinions there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so now we come to the second part. So this is, we want to introduce with you what is DCAT-3 currently presenting, what are the changes compared to 2, and how it will impact DCAT-AP. So what will be the impact? It's just a presentation of what it is, the alignment process without making any firm decisions. That's a discussion we would like to start with you on GitHub, but it's good to have a little bit of a summary starting point together. So we know that it is estimated to become a recommendation in the first quarter of next year. And so the goal is to do this early alignment so that we still can adopt as soon as possible right after a new version of DCAT-AP that is aligned with that. And at Woods in particular, and that's, you know this all, there's a new concept like dataset series in DCAT-3 that would address these issues which are raised in the past. If we look to the changelog of DCAT-3 compared to DCAT-2, then we see that there's, of course, dataset series. Associated with it is information about versioning and version support that has been elaborated. A few new properties have been added and a class checksum has been added. So I will walk you through to each of them, just what is the change proposed, and then point you to the GitHub issue where you can contribute with your insights. So this is the goal, and not to have a long discussion yet on this. That will be through GitHub and through maybe in the next webinar to finalize our conclusions. So what is DCAT-3 telling about the dataset series? So it introduces a new class, dataset series, and this class relates to a set of datasets using the property in series. And this series is kind of a chain, a sequence that of these datasets are connected with each other. And so what the definition says at W3C is that a dataset series is a collection of datasets that are published separately but share characteristics that group them. So this is the definition in there, and this is what you see in the organization. So you have a dataset series that is related with a number of datasets, and you can navigate to this chain via pref next and find the first and the last in the series. There is additionally a slight extension as well done to some properties that as well relate datasets with each other, namely replaces and is part of have been highlighted as, let's say, existing properties. They were already mentioned in DCAT-2, but they get now an additional highlight just to cover the typical use case that one dataset replaces another, or one dataset is a part of another. This is typical cases that happen in dataset series. So this is available. This is what you can use to model the thing. So what if you look to...
Matthias had a comment, and I would think, Matthias, we're not going to have a discussion about this here at the webinar because we don't have real time. I think this would be really a subject that we can discuss in more depth when we have 3/4 of an hour or so. But certainly we would encourage you to actually put your ideas on GitHub on this.
Yeah, and we can take this up in a separate, in the next webinar, indeed, to go in depth. So topic 240 is created to collect proposals to give you the place on what actually is additionally you want to express about the dataset series. And so at this moment in DCAT, it is just a class, And now we want to say what you want to see, what you make it more useful to present it to the visitors of your catalog. And I put here 3 elements into it, but it is not limited. If it's just to give you a taste, we want to have a presence of a title, or minimally at least 1 element in the series, or the particular way of the chain must be. It's not just yeah, there might be an open thing on it. And so this is the place to do it. What I want to is the next slide, of course. What I want to highlight is some note is that with the notion of dataset series, we will refer to the thing that is explicitly tagged as DCAT dataset series. We're not going to talk about dataset series that are not explicitly tagged as dataset series. Because otherwise we can we mix each other and then we say it looks like or something like that. So in that sense, it is a bit stronger. It discourages the other alternative methods that are mentioned in DCAT a bit stronger, because it is not naming them explicitly as dataset series. So this is where the discussion then indeed might come forever to this, how we handle it and visualize and so on. It doesn't mean that it is excluded the other approaches, but it will be seen as a tightly set collection of interlinked datasets and distributions. So it is not conflicting, but it will not be called a dataset series. Because otherwise it becomes very difficult.
Okay, and I see there people are in favor of having a meeting about that, and also to discuss the relation to data services. So data series and data services. Okay.
If we do the assessment on versioning, so that's another topic into it, then I made a column on what is DCAT-3 proposing, what is our current proposal specification, and then you see that we have incompatibilities, namely that DCAT introduces in its own namespace has version, is version of version. So we have, if we want to align, we have incompatibilities, and so we have the deprecate previous usages in favor of new URIs. So that is the impact, and again, we have issue 241, what is over there to discuss on that. A new property has been added, ADMS status. It was not in previous version, and it is adopted in DCAT-3 as a property of DCAT resource. So as the cataloged entity in the catalog, it can have a status. And here we have a slight difference between DCAT-AP and DCAT-3, namely that DCAT-3 is placing it on the cataloged resource, whereas DCAT-AP has it already present on catalog record and distribution, namely those things that are yet not cataloged resources. So the question is, and this is an open question, should we add it to the cataloged resource? Does it be valuable or not? So back again, this is an open question, but we already have 2 usages larger than DCAT-3.
There was an issue. There was a GitHub issue 242.
Yeah. 242.
I see Geraldine has a comment about data series, but you're welcome to make that also on the GitHub issue.
Yeah. And then we have a new property, super property DCAT resource, which is a super property of the specialized versions that exists already today, namely DCAT dataset, DCAT data service. I only showed here for datasets on it, on the cataloged resource. So it's for indicating a membership of a resource into a catalog. Normally, and this is what in DCAT-AP is the case, we recommend to use the most detailed layer because that gives us the most firm grip on the semantics, and we reduce less the abstract representations only to as an aid to structuring and to make it simpler sometimes. But so we focus on it. If we look to the specialization here, we could see that it simplifies some work. We have a requirement stating that the catalog should not be non-empty as a good indication. That's well, as a warning or something that we can, then we could do that using DCAT resource more easily, express that more easily. But that implies that we must guarantee that the shackle imports the subclass relationship. Otherwise, it is not automatically derived, and then you have to add it explicitly, and then it becomes, of course, a burden. So this is an impact on that level. That's a minor suggestion, but it's another one, and this is more discutable and so on. It is unclear how to indicate in DCAT 3 what are the dataset series in the catalog, and only the dataset series, because there's no specific subproperty created dataset series with lowercase. So existing datasets, DCAT dataset, DCAT dataset service, and DCAT catalog exist, but not DCAT dataset series. That means that we have no way to indicate or to find only the dataset series in a catalog. We only can find the superset of that collection. So if that is needed and you find it valuable and so on, then this is a good place in the issue here 243 to discuss this on that. And note that this is.
And it's also something that we need to discuss with W3C, because it seems that I've missed something there.
Yeah, but that seems to be indeed the case, yeah. And it might be as well connected with the discussion on the profiling support and so on. So that's a highlight of a connection that might be how to do better profiling and so on. So if you have insights and that you want to differentiate the list of dataset series from the list of datasets, the normal datasets, then yeah, that would be good to contribute to this issue. Andrea?
Yeah, thanks, Bert. No, just to clarify this point, because so the reason why there is no specific subproperty for dataset series is that because dataset series is defined as subclasses of datasets, which means that to specify that a series in a catalog, you just use the same property that you use for datasets.
Yes, but then you cannot distinguish only the list of the dataset series. You don't know that.
Okay, no, but what you say unclear how to indicate the dataset series are in the catalog. So you can indicate that. So there is a property you can use.
Yeah.
There is not a specific subproperty, which is a different point. And I mean, for finding the dataset series, just have to query for the class instances. So you don't need necessarily to have a subproperty for that, no?
But the question is that do you consider that as a data set? That means if you query for, like the Lutger is pointing out, then you have to make a more complicated query. You have to say those data sets. If you want to find the data sets, then you have to find the data sets that are in the catalog that are not dataset series. That's the change of query that happens as well. So there are a few side effects on it, and the same argument, and it is a bit of weird, DCAT catalog exists, and catalog is a subclass of data sets. So why DCAT catalog still exists then? It's a bit of a
Yeah,
open.
and I mean, this ambiguity can be in case you apply also inference, but usually if you do a Spark query saying DCAT catalog, DCAT dataset, DCAT dataset series, then you get the dataset series in the catalog. But okay, but I think that is good that this is read to W3C, so it can be clarified, and in case if there is a strong need of having a specific subproperty, I mean, this may be included possibly in the future version of
I asking it is indeed, it is here to contribute that you think what you want to do with your portal, what is the need, do you need it? If this is working for you, just illustrating what is the current case. That is not more than that, but you have to be aware that there's an impact.
Matthias has his hand up.
Well, yeah, so in practice, the triple connecting the catalog to the dataset or the data service or even the data set services series is not really needed from our perspective. You always query from the perspective of, yeah, the typing, I would say. Having a lot of triples pointing from the catalog to the dataset, for me, it seems actually like a bad modeling decision. It should point in the other direction. The dataset should point to the the catalog it belongs to instead. Yeah, so the typing is fine. At least that's how we do it in the Swedish data portal. I don't know in the other data portals.
Okay, so there's an issue there, so we can just continue to discuss that, and we can also discuss that further with W3C. Okay.
And then the last change, and that's actually that is adopted from DCAT-AP, at least that's how it is, the motivation comes from, it's checksum. So it is fully aligned with us at the moment. So unless there are new changes in the last few weeks upcoming, and then this will be exactly as is in DCAT-AP, and so it will be a trivial adoption. But anyhow, I created an issue on it just to trigger and to, if there's some changes or small changes that has to happen with it. So in summary, in general, dataset series technically can be adopted with a minimal impact. So there's no, let's say on the specification side of DCAT-AP, not a big impact on that side. On the usability, there might be impact, but not on the technical side. On versioning, however, there are some changes. So this is where publishers will have to do, if we want to follow and more closely to DCAT-3, we have to do changes. So checksum is an adoption of what we do, so it offers a new possibility, but at least ADMS status, that is a topic that we can open thing it. And then, like we just started, this how to denote the content of the catalog and so on, that might be a reflection that we need to do. So I created as well an issue 239 to collect all the issues that have to do with the alignment. From there you can diverse on it, otherwise you can follow the tag as well and so on the DCAT alignment in GitHub. So that was it with regard to the alignment. Are there any general comments on this alignment, on the process, what the expectations are that we can express, not on the details, but on, let's say, on the process and expectations? We already registered that there was a need for, let's say, a good discussion on dataset series and to see the impact on the portals. Something else?
And for the rest, I think we have the discussion on GitHub. Matthias?
Yeah, a very brief comment. When we introduced DCAT data services, I think there was not sufficiently amount of discussion of which properties to actually include from the DCAT resource class in the recommendation. So let's not forget about that when we do dataset services. Series. Yeah. Sorry, they are so close in name.
Yeah, so that's already, the starting point is there for on GitHub, but let's do a good discussion and think in your portal as well what is needed critically needed and what is, let's say, desired. Then we have a good basis and good motivation for each of the properties.
Okay, thank you, Bert, for presenting all those issues, and we're looking forward to your contributions on GitHub on those. And then we'll do the wrap up and the next steps. Yeah. So
okay. Yeah. So as announced that. So we have this is a series of webinars from CIMIC. It's not only on DCAT-AP, but this we do a follow up on it, and this will be scheduled. We will do an announcement, but it will be after the Christmas period. So then we can take into account your comments on GitHub and have a firm new proposal ready for you to discuss.
I see a comment from Oystein that we want to discuss high-value datasets, and I understand from that we're going to do this right after this webinar. We have an informal meeting for an hour to discuss the way that high-value datasets can be expressed in DCAT-AP.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, good, Oystein. Yeah, so that's it for the webinar on the new release of DCAT-AP. So you'll be getting further information. There is further discussion on GitHub. And I guess, Bert, we're going to share a report of the meeting and the conclusions that were reached in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. But anyhow, contribute as you're already doing on the GitHub. This is really workful. Yeah.
Okay. So we have another.
To actually indicate, does DCAT have any ideas on creating extended guidelines or best practice repos? Kuldar, what do you mean with best practice repos?
Examples?
Yeah, hello. No, it's really the point is that DCAT-AP is good. So the point that we are discussing details of the implementation and the individual elements means that it's quite mature. But what we see is that many of the implementers, so the data providers into our national data portal, still have trouble on how to fill one or the other element, and what is the difference between a data set and the distribution. Now the data set series is coming up and again. So what is a series? What is a data set? So the kind of extended best practices or guidelines on how to implement, how to interpret one or the other of the entities in the model. So that's something that we see that in practice we need quite a lot. And I suppose the question is if we should develop these guidelines alone in Estonia, or is there some room for international collaboration?
I think that's a good question for the community. I know there are some resources with training resources that can be used, but I think we have discussed that in the past as well. We have some guidelines, and there is a collection of guidelines on JoinUp as well. But in some cases, it would be hard to actually think from the perspective of the user in a particular country, because we are not really clear about, of course, what the perspective of those people are. But one of the things that we can do, and I think we've tried that before as well, to provide some space where people can share guidelines that they have. The other problem, of course, is that possibly people want to do the guidelines in the national language, which that would make it hard to share. But it's certainly, we can put it on the list again if there is enough interest in setting up some way of knowledge sharing or looking for common ways of doing that. Then I think we can think about how we can facilitate that.
Yeah, exactly. It's the problem is that guidelines can be kind of the most practical guidelines are coming from down-to-earth practice in member states. So it's, so we as the owners of the national portals have most to contribute. So I believe that the guidelines created
is maybe not the best way, but again, it's providing a platform for discussions and collaboration and sharing best practices is maybe
Let's see if we can set up something for doing that, and then see if there's any interest from the member states to contribute to that. I think it's a good point. We'll put that on our list. Okay.
Yes, indeed. Feel free to share any requirements in writing so that we can better formulate what can be created in order to be valid.
Yeah.
And Max?
No, I want to give the floor to you, Pavlina, to do the closing.
Yes, thank you very much for attending this meeting. I think that your feedback was very valid, and we see the need also to better elaborate some points of discussion regarding the data series, data sets. So I think that we will notify you for a forthcoming webinar after the one on the 16th of January that tackles core vocabularies. And before we close, for those that do not want to attend the unofficial discussion about that high-value data set, I would like to remind you that on the 6th of December, there is the SEMIC the yearly SEMIC conference, so we will be happy to have you attending and to share views on different things. That the main topic of this is data spaces. Thank you so much for attending.
Okay, and thanks you, everybody. And then we have a couple of minutes, Bert, before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, I think that would be good to have a quick, short break of 5 minutes, something like this.
Yes.
So that